Hello, and welcome to First Geek 411's book club. Tonight we will be discussing Living Resistance by Kaitlin B. Curtice. Um, Before we get into that, you can find us at all the social medias Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as One Geek 411. Come chat with us over on our Discord server or shoot us an email at 1stgeek411@gmail.com. Watch live on our Twitch every Monday night at 6:45 Mountain Time and find all our videos over on YouTube. And you can also check out our sweet, sweet merch at our Redbubble store. I'm very excited to talk about this. I feel like normally we have a bit more like book club chatter before we actually talk about the book. And I have no idea how anyone's feeling about this book going into it. So
Because I feel
I'm
like I'm
excited.
normally trying to gauge y'all. Because it's like after the Black Widow spoiler cast that I came in, like, again, by no means thinking that movie was S tier, but like I came in with a very different energy than the rest of y'all, and it's like I've been burnt before.
Hurt
Uh,
way too many times, huh, Cameron?
Yeah.
yeah, I did come in on that one pretty hot.
All of your thoughts and opinions when it
Yes.
comes to Black Widow.
All right. But this was a new release earlier this month. So, very fun to be talking about this brand new book in which Kaitlin B. Curtice, an enrolled member of the Potawatomi Nation, casts a vision for healing and finding wholeness in life by questioning the status quo and living alternatively to the way things have always been. What was everyone's first impressions?
But who is everyone?
Us.
Us.
What it means is you forgot to introduce us.
Hi,
Ah,
I'm
that's fine.
Shanine.
We
It's
don't need
because
that.
it's
Everyone
because
knows who we
Google
are.
Drive deleted all our
Yeah.
notes, and I didn't have it in my notes because I can't just copy and paste it anymore, and it's really messed things up for me. So
Valid.
We can definitely blame Google Drive.
yeah, I am
No, I agree. It's
good.
I'm with you there.
All right. So people who will soon be giving their first impressions are Emma
Hi.
and Cameron.
Hello, hello.
Yay. We're
Yay.
gonna get there. It's fine.
It's all good. We're having a good time.
Yeah, we are. That's the most important part.
I'm adding it now. All right. First impressions.
I enjoyed this book. I thought it was good. I feel like I'm always interested, and I feel like this is me as I've gotten older, in like the logistics of book writing. And it's always funny to see when like the sections get smaller and smaller as you go. Um, but I really liked this. I thought that Kaitlin had a lot of really good ideas and a very good like point of view. We'll get into some more specifics on those, as I don't want to take away from future questions. But like, yeah, I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. I also really enjoyed it. It reminds me a lot of my mom, actually, and her book writing process, because she's writing a book right now. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and getting to hear and read about someone else's perception of the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also quite enjoyed it. I think it was very and thoughtful in a way that it made me think as well. And yeah, like y'all said, an interesting perspective hearing about somebody else's experiences and ideas and beliefs. It was good.
Oh, I also want to say, I guess on the screen, A+ cover. Alana
Yeah.
is the artist who did that. Remember, you shouldn't judge books by their cover, but if they really meant that, they'd stop making cool covers. So
Yeah. I really
feel free to
cover
judge
art.
by the cover. So
If there was like a poster or
Mhm.
something, a print of this cover, art, I would get it.
Um, yeah, Kaitlin B. Curtice's publishers take note.
Hire that person again to make more covers.
Yep.
All right. What is your experience with this genre that I'm kind of classifying as nonfiction, casting a vision for a good life?
This is like the only book in this genre that I've really read because I don't usually go to these books. Um, so I would say this is my first interaction with this kind of thing, and it was quite enjoyable.
I'm kind of the exact opposite, I guess. So one of the things that I've talked about with book club before is that like I didn't really read fiction before book club, and a lot of that was because I'm not like a huge reader. But when I was a minister, I really felt like the majority of my reading needed to be ministry related things, um, and so I spent most of my like reading energy reading like nonfiction books like this, and so and kind of ones that were like not always like explicitly religious, as this one's not explicitly religious, but things that I could take something to and said like this is definitely the kind of book that I would have eaten up um, for ministry stuff.
Nonfiction isn't like my main genre, but I have read a few that I think I would put in this category, and they have all been by white women, basically. So, very different ideas in them. And I think, I'm going to be honest, less helpful ones. Um, I still can't get over the one that I read where there was an entire chapter ranting about how leggings are not pants. And I was like, how
It just keeps
is,
going.
like, why? Why are we talking about this for so long? Why is a woman making this argument? Like, I thought we got past the whole leggings thing. Just let us wear leggings. Anyways, I found this to be much more thoughtful, much more thought provoking, much more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. What were your expectations going into this book, and what was your familiarity with Indigenous culture and beliefs?
I had very few expectations in the good way. Um, just in the sense that I didn't have, you know, I didn't know what to expect, but I was just excited to read it. And then, sort of indigenous culture wise and interaction wise, partially what comes to mind. I mean, I grew up in Seattle and Washington area where there's a lot of there's a lot of larger reservations and like sort of the tribes in that area play a bigger role in just the general function of society than a lot of other places. So there's a lot of um, native artwork and um, just handiwork and um, tribes people who you interact with on a more regular basis that was like I grew up around, and it always reminds me of home. I even have, I don't know where I have it, but I have a little like pocket spirit token that's native artwork that a friend gave me. Oh, here it is. That I sort of keep on my desk because it reminds me of home. Um, so it's something that's super familiar. And then I had Kaya, the Native American American Girl doll growing up. Um, but that was about it. I've always loved learning more about native tribes and had a couple of like their legends or folk tales as kids' books growing up, which was fun. But I've always loved learning more about different tribes and their belief systems. So this was fun to read coming from someone who is a part of that one of those communities and getting to hear how she interacts with the world. So
So for me, shamefully little is honest. Like this is like the honest answer. Um, like I mean, I went to like college in Oklahoma, which obviously has a lot of ties to Native communities, but I was not really around that as I was in mostly the white evangelical Christian bubble that was there for the college I was at, and um, so like while there's definitely been aspects like kind of like what Emma referenced of it being in the area, it's not something that I've really gotten to spend a lot of time with on any serious scale. Um, and then, kind of similarly, when I was in Connecticut, there was a lot of geographic references to the Native Americans that lived there, but it unfortunately wasn't something that I necessarily knew a lot of people that were part of. I did have one really good friend but in general, it's not something that was like a big part of that culture where I was at there.
So I read another of Caitlin B. Curtice's books earlier this month because I wanted to read that one before we read this one. So I just had to squish them both in really fast, um, which was her previous book, Native. And I found that one discussed mainly decolonization, which is a very important topic to be discussing in relation to Indigenous culture. Um, but I didn't find it to be as personally applicable a lot of the time and just a bit drier in general. So I was a little bit apprehensive going into this one and wasn't expecting it to be like as relatable as it was. Um, I think as for my familiarity with Indigenous cultures, also very little compared to what I would like it to be. Like we learn at the time it felt like a lot in school, and now looking back it's like basically nothing, probably like barely grazing the surface, um, of like the colonization of Canada and Indigenous cultures and things like that. um, so recently I've been trying to learn a bit more. um, been listening to a podcast called Cooper Island, which is about one of the residential schools in BC. It is not an easy listen, but a lot of, I don't know, bringing light to things that need to be brought to light, I guess. Um, and I don't know, beyond that, um, I have an Indigenous friend and have got to hear a little bit about some of the like traditions and things that she engages in with her family and band, which have been really interesting to hear about. So, yeah, I don't know a lot, but I would like to know more. All right. What spoke to you the most from living resistance?
I think just throughout her talking about how she and her partner are raising their kids sort of in this, you know, way of respect for other religions and cultures and like just raising them to be sort of resistant to the negativities of the world or just like the more negative side of things and just being loving, caring individuals for the world and its goodness, because that relates to a lot of how I was raised and just seeing a lot of my own childhood reflect in that and just how she has also learned from that experience of, you know, raising her kids. Like she's learned from her kids as much as her kids have learned from her.
For me, I feel like the way that Kaitlin talked about church really connected with me, and kind of hit a lot of the same ways I've been feeling for different reasons, in the sense that we're from pretty different walks of life. But like, there's a lot of what she talked about that like were similar to things I've been feeling. I'll have some quotes for later on, but that was something that I really connected with. And when we did our book club on Not All Who Wander Spiritually Are Lost, one of the things that I brought up, is that like I really wanted to feel about church the way that Tracy did. And that was something that like I kind of struggled with as we went through that book. Whereas for this one, I really felt seen from the way that Kaitlin talks about where the church is at, with some of the struggles that I have been feeling lately. And so like that definitely was a big thing that connected me that I wasn't like necessarily expecting either. Like from the bio, I knew that there would be like Christian stuff, but I was not expecting, again, for a book that is not overtly Christian, I was not necessarily not necessarily or not necessarily overtly Christian. I mean, not overtly about church. Maybe that's the better way to say that. Like, faith is a major theme throughout the book, but like, it's not overtly like the state of the church in America kind of thing. Um, and so I was definitely not really expecting that, but yeah, I really felt like connected in that regard.
Yeah. I think for me, I just really appreciated how, I guess, grounded her vision for resistance is. Like, I feel like when a lot of people talk about resistance and things like that and like changing the culture, it's like you have to be a big social activist and like know everything about all of the causes. And if you don't know something about something, you're
A
like
bad
a
person
bad
or
person. Yeah, like all of that. And like if you don't follow every single cause there is, like you're leaving people out and you're a bad person. And it doesn't feel doable to do all the things because it's not, but it still feels like that's an expectation sometimes. Whereas this was, I felt a lot less about action necessarily and more just like a way of living your life.
Very well said.
And yeah, it made resistance like, I guess, something I desire more in that sense. All right. And speaking of how Curtice talks about resistance. She says, for the purpose of this book, I'd like us to understand resistance as the way we use our everyday lives to exert energy against the dangerous status quo of our time. But resistance cannot only be about what we are against. We must both find and create that better way together. What do you think of this definition of resistance?
Not to get too on the nose, but it really reminded me of a quote from Star Wars, um, which which is that's how we're gonna win, not fighting what we hate, saving what we love.
Yep.
And yeah, so that was I really liked that. As like pretty much like the first thing I thought of when I first saw this quote, um, and I really like that because I feel like, and maybe this is just where I'm at with media currently, because this is kind of some major themes that are going on in shows like The Mandalorian and stuff like that. But the idea of like if you're just fighting to stop something, it's very easy to fall into the same trap. And so I really liked this idea of like it's can't just be about resisting against something. It's like actually has to be about trying to move towards something better.
Yeah, I really like it as well. It I mean, in discussing resistance, what comes to my mind immediately is essentially the scientific definition of it, um, which is like something that equates enough force to stop movement, essentially, or slow down movement or whatever. And I feel like that can be seen in many ways in this, and this can be seen in many ways in that, because resistance itself is not necessarily a bad thing, even though in many situations we see it as bad, or society implies it's a bad thing for any number of reasons. But the only way historically anything has improved has been through the resistance of the lesser groups who did not like it. Um, and even just like resistance itself is neither good nor bad. But I mean, the thing that really stands out is we must both find and create the better way together, because that like it's fighting against resistance and then pushing back, which is also resistance. I don't know. It's this whole like I don't remember half of my science classes, but I'm just thinking of force and how if we are as much a force of nature as anything else. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Feel like I answered this question in the last question.
How dare.
So we're going to continue on. All right. Several times throughout the book, Curtice comes back to kind of a bit of a mantra saying, you are a human being. You are always arriving. What do you think of this medicine, as she calls it?
I like this. I think it's a good message, and I think this gets back, Shane, to what you were saying earlier. But the idea that we live at the point that we live at, and like as we can try to strive to do better, like we also are not going to ever presently be perfect. Um, and yeah, so I really like this idea that as we that it's not the failures of our past that define us, like, because we are still trying to get to the place that we're trying to be at. And so,
Yeah. I think it's very similar to slash a reframing of like it's okay to make mistakes and or like everyone's imperfect, but in a slightly different mindset of like we're not going to get there on the first attempt. And like regardless of whether or not we do get there on the first attempt, we're going to get there at some point. And then when we get there, there's always something else to then work towards getting to. And I think that's a really beautiful thing because it's like once you reach one goal, there's something else to work towards. And when you do reach a goal, it's something to celebrate. But if you don't reach a goal, at least, and or if you don't reach it when you want to, that's okay. Um, I actually just told a good friend this morning, the water that hardens the egg is the same water that softens the potatoes. And I don't remember where I saw that, but I feel like it's a very similar thing of like the elements that, you know, make something challenging for one person are not necessarily challenging for someone else. Or, you know, elements that impact one person one way will impact a different person a different way. And it's all just a matter of making sure you're in the right conditions to be successful. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I like how it emphasizes identity and who you are over what you're doing, um, while also giving room for growth. Like we can always be working towards being better, knowing better, doing better. Um, and as we learn more, we can continue to know better and do better. And we're not going to know the best things right at the beginning or maybe ever, but we're constantly learning more and working towards that. And yeah, I think that just offers a lot of grace in the way that we live and just allowing for growth, I guess. All right. So Curtice kind of divides our lives into realms, which you can see illustrated by the Venn diagram on the cover. Um, one of the realms she talks about is the personal realm, in which she discusses art, presence, embodiment, and radical self love. Um, what are your thoughts on this realm? Resistance in this realm? What spoke out to you the most from this realm? Stood out to you?
I'll go first again. I liked the idea of presence as
Yep.
resistance. That was one that kind of spoke to me as someone who definitely has been known to struggle with being in the like being the here, like that kind of thing. I tend to kind of often be off and kind of thinking my own things or in my own head. I really liked that one, and a quote that that I really liked out of this. And this kind of ties in with some of the themes in later realms, but the idea that the land is the real teacher. It's on page 40, by the way. The land is the real teacher. All we need as students is mindfulness. Paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world, receiving the gifts with open eyes and an open heart. So I really liked that idea. This like that. This is something that like again I kind of connected with as like from my time as a minister of like there's both like the balance of leaving space for the Holy Spirit to show up, and then there's like the space of seeking to get out of the way of the Holy Spirit, if that distinction made sense as I said that. And yeah, so I really liked this idea of just being here, being mindful, being aware. Like in our social media driven age is like such an act of resistance to just be with the people you're with.
Yeah, sort of similar to that. The two things that stood out to me that are sort of connected. Or two things? Were these? Okay, these were actually separate ideas, but they were close together in pages. Um, were boundaries, her talk about boundaries and self-care, self-love, um, and how the concept of self-love has gotten swallowed up by capitalism, essentially, in spa days and shopping sprees, and how, um, let's see, where is it? Um, Dang it, I had this page marked, and I didn't have a pencil, so I didn't mark it. Okay, here we go. But self-care gets swallowed up by spa days and shopping sprees, and before we know it, it's a buzzword for anything that can be made into a product to be sold. We must buy our self-care. That is not what self-care actually is. But that's a conversation for another day. For the sake of this chapter, we're focusing on something else. Resistance as radical self-love. And I thought that was really impactful because we do live in a society where it's all like have a problem, you can make it go away with money. And yet we're constantly like, money doesn't solve problems. And then the next day we turn around and spend money on something thinking it'll solve our problems because that's what society tells us. Um, or at least tries to shove down our throats. Um, and I just thought that was like, I mean, I even think of Parks and Rec, where two of the characters have like a self-care day and they go out and splurge a whole bunch of
Treat
money on
yourself.
themselves, which is great and fun, but at the same time it's like, is that really self-love? Like sit down and reflect on yourself. Because then she goes on to talk about doing the dishes and how she reflects on her life through doing the dishes. And that whole conversation sort of flows into discussion about boundaries and how the dog is yelling his head off in the other room because I set a boundary and was like, I am not going to deal with you during book club, and he's mad and is in his crate. Um, the author didn't talk about that, but I brought it up because boundaries she talked about. um, but she mentions many of us learned to be afraid of how our relationships will turn out if we enact boundaries, and we learn to give up parts of ourselves in order to maintain peace in the process. And when I read that, I started to reflect on how we are willing to give up our own peace to protect the peace of others. We being in general, not necessarily anyone in particular, and how it is in many places valued that, you know, you got to give up your own sanity for the sake of other people's sanity, and how that's not necessarily always a healthy thing to do. And that's something that just stood out. Radical self love, this practice of resistance, is not about being selfish. It's about honoring our own bodies and spirits, and it's about honoring others by being honest. And I feel like we don't spend enough time being honest with ourselves because we're afraid to look inside. So, those are the spots that stood out to me.
To nobody's surprise, I am sure, the part that stood out to me was art. Um,
It's because it talks about storytelling.
Surprise. Oh man, I loved how much she
Shocker!
brought up storytelling throughout the whole book. Like every time she said storytelling, I was like, yes, go on. Um,
Please continue.
but yeah, there was so much in the art chapter that was just so good. Um, she says, maybe that's the gift we give one another, to remember our complexities through the art we create and the spaces we inhabit. And I mean, yeah, I feel like that's basically the point of art, is to be able to represent our experiences and, I don't know, to be able to experience others' experiences through that art. I think, yeah, art can bring so much understanding, because it speaks to us in a different kind of way. It helps us to connect to it differently. And I'm a fan of art. It's good. It's good stuff.
As you should be. Us artists enjoy you being a fan of art.
Yes.
And you appreciate other people being a fan of your art. So,
Yes.
you know, appreciate the fans. As we
Yeah.
are all fans of art.
She also says art isn't just for entertainment, it's also a way of being in the world. And of course, I love that as well. That, I don't know, it seems to go so far beyond just like art is important. It's more like art is a necessity, and it's part of who we all are as humans. And it's just one way that we get to exist in the world rather than just like something we can do here. I like it. And then she also says art heals us both individually and communally, which I don't know, not a lot to say about that. It's just good.
That was one that I had marked as well.
I think that's part of like something that makes me think of is like the 9/11 memorial in
Yep.
New York City, where like some of the like intention that they put behind things was for it to be art.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are things there that are not like there's a big it's a picture of the sky, but it's a bunch of different shades and it represents how everyone saw the sky that morning, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's such a beautiful thing for people coming together, even though it isn't directly about the towers in the same way that some of the other stuff is in there. Like that's one of the things that really stuck with me, like because it is about that community and how they are still being unified. Like I think that's such a cool power of art.
The thing I also just that I think about that example, Cameron, is I think it's either on a plaque there or in something that I read of we could have rebuilt there in the sense that we could have just thrown a couple of business buildings back up and moved on with our lives as an act of resistance. But the more powerful thing about that is that we said, yeah, we could do that, but what's the point in that? That's like that's not the kind of that's the kind of resistance that they're expecting in that action. Instead, we're going to put in a memorial to all of the lives that you felt you needed to destroy or whatever. And instead of resisting through rebuilding business buildings, we resisted through art. And it goes back into that, like, we heal through art as a community. And there's the 2 fountains at the foundation of each building. That's just water pouring into the ground where the building stood. And they could have put buildings back in and allowed capitalism to move on or whatever. But we were just like, nah, bro, we're gonna mark this spot as a community. And I think that's really cool.
All right. And speaking of community, the next realm is the communal realm, in which we talk about childcare, ethical practices, solidarity work, protecting the land, and kinship. What are your thoughts on this realm?
The thing that I thought was really cool that stood out to me in the first part of just like the whole thing was her discussion on the efforts to put Native American, or not necessarily Native American, but Indigenous children in the foster care system back with like Indigenous families so that they could, be in a setting where they could grow and learn in the context of their culture, and how in some ways colonization still exists in taking children away, even if it's unintentional. And I just wish that kind of system were more, that kind of system being like putting kids with, those who know their culture and can teach them about it. I wish that kind of thing were more honored and respected and actually practiced in a stronger setting just because it is so valuable. Um, I really enjoyed this whole section because I've worked with kids. A lot of my career is very community based, and without that community, like, I'm a filmmaker. If I didn't have anyone, nothing would get done. Like, we gotta work together. And it's such a powerful thing to read about the concept of community from a different perspective, and how without everyone, nothing gets done. And without everyone resisting together, resistance would not get done. Let's see, this page. I put a bookmark and then it fell out, and so I don't know the page that my quote was on for this section. So Cameron, you can go while I find my
Say the struggle.
The struggle is real.
For me, there were 2 things that I kind of like specifically jumped out to me, and they kind of tie together even though they're in different sections within this realm. So the first one was in, I guess it's the second one reading through, but I think the idea connects back. And so this is in solidarity work. Kaitlin writes, one of the greatest frustrations with the white toxic evangelicalism we've seen in America, the evangelicalism I grew up with, is that the creation of cultural identity based in shame and fear of the other took precedence over accepting and celebrating other people as the humans that they are. So that really stood out to me. I thought that's honestly, I think one of our biggest like as a people, challenges that we've seen throughout history is that we've always villainized the other, and that kind of stands out just as the when we as humans are at our best, it is not when we're focused on that fear of other, but it's when we are unifying together. Ideally, not just against a different other, but but it is when we are coming together and having that time. That's solidarity to go to her point for that part of the realm. Then the other one, this was in childcare, which props to not just being have kids, um, but this idea of that she writes. When we refuse to care for all our children in society, we are missing out on the work of solidarity and resistance. We are choosing the status quo instead of the steady, hard, beautiful work of healing and care. And I like how those two definitely have similar themes and tie together, because so many kids are adversely and long term affected by things that are so far out of their realm that the side effects last for so long, and it kind of gets down to that a lot of what is caused by that is either that fear or greed that that she referenced in the solidarity chapter. And yeah, that was just something that those two ideas definitely connected with me, like and the way and the quote from the childcare section in specific really connected me with the idea of the early church. What did the early church do? They took care of widows and orphans. It's not that they took care of Christian widows and orphans, but they took care of all widows and orphans. And so and so that living without fear and that accepting of all and helping all, I think, is such an important thing.
I found my spot. It's the start of a chapter, and she says, because I'm an author, I often get asked about the intended audience of my books. In one questionnaire, I answered this question by typing human beings, and then decided to be less snarky about it and list some specific groups of people. But the reality is, solidarity work really is about the work of being human. In our humanity, we are meant to love ourselves well, to love one another well, and to love the earth and the creatures around us well. Solidarity is grounded in the idea of belonging and kinship. So how can I possibly choose a portion of people in our society to read my book when I hope to learn from everyone, and in the process have many learn from me? The reciprocity, yeah, goes far beyond a target audience and marketing technique, and yet it's difficult sometimes to claim that we belong to one another when we have so badly abused and have harmed each other throughout the centuries. And I like that whole page, essentially. Um, but it just really stood out in this whole conversation because we like to group others into others, groups of others. We have ourselves and we have others. And we see that a lot in biases and preconceived notions and all of that fun stuff. But we can't take care of the widows and children and orphans if we see them as other. We have to see them as ourselves in order to stand in solidarity with them, even if we're not widows or orphans. We would want someone to take care of us if we were in that situation. And it's all about support. So yeah.
What stood out to me from this realm was protecting the land. I think I think growing up, connecting with the land was not really made to be something that was important. It was kind of more something for overzealous environmentalists or new agey,
Mm.
like verging on the weird and like heretical almost. And it's like, I don't know how we got there from like God creating the earth for us to being like, yeah, but like don't like the earth too much because that would be weird.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I just really liked the way she talked about it and how connecting with the land and protecting the earth is important to our own healing in our lives personally and in our communities. Um, yeah, that I think, yeah, that protecting the land goes beyond more than just the land, that it affects everything, basically. And I think it was also interesting just to hear more about her indigenous perspective of the importance of land to um, their bands and tribes. I think we hear a lot about, like, obviously colonization is not great and kicked people off their land and things like that. Um, but we don't necessarily understand what that means because coming from our point of view, land is more just like parcels to be bought and sold. And that's not what it looks like from their point of view. It's they're much more connected to their land and their home than just it being an arbitrary place. And I guess speaking of the land that we grew up in, moving on to the ancestral realm, where we talk about decolonizing generosity, intergenerational healing, liminality, and facing history. Thoughts on this realm?
White people in history suck. I am
Yep.
willing to say that loud and proud. White historic people suck. And white people today suck. It has not changed. Though I would like to change it. And I know we all here would like to make that better. um, yeah, so I am with her on the fact that I love the whole little section about decolonizing and indigenizing Thanksgiving. Obviously, I don't know what slash how it's celebrated in Canada, but speaking from a more Americanized um, side of things, um, I just love that she says, indeed, this holiday is built on lies, not just the lies of how Europeans treated the Wampanoag, I apologize, people when they arrived here, but the lies buried by the government along the way. Um, I think it's really important to start those conversations during holidays where the holidays themselves try to hide it with like, oh, it's, Christopher Columbus came and like befriended the natives and the natives taught them how to grow corn and whatever. No. Um, I I think it's really important to have those conversations and it's great to see. I wish it were more a topic of conversation in greater society today to be happening, of looking at how we can change our mistakes rather than just saying, oh yeah, we've messed up in the past. Okay, how are you going to fix that in the future? And here she's giving us ways to fix that. Um, but yeah, it's been a long day. So all of my thoughts are all over the place.
One of the things that I liked, this was in the decolonization chapter as well. Um, she writes, as a young person, I once attended a church camp called Armor. The entire camp was themed around a militaristic idea of Christianity, calling us to put on the armor of God as we read in the New Testament. Through camps like this one and the overall nature of evangelical churches I was raised in, I had adopted a nationalistic view of God and of my Christian responsibility, as well as the message that as a woman, my place was in the home, supporting whomever my future husband would be. So like that first section of that quote kind of connected with me in the sense of one of the things that I always thought was strange was that militaristic view of our Christianity. Like, especially because this ties in with what I brought up for the other realms, but like, especially because it's so often tied in to the fight against the other, not into like sharing the gospel well, if that makes sense. Going back to even what Kaitlin referenced earlier and what we've talked about before with the idea of like, oh, the churches would come and then they would basically kidnap kids, all in the name of teaching the kids about Jesus, where really that wasn't like that might have technically happened, but that was not the goal.
Or even the Spanish invading South America,
Yeah.
like that whole travesty. Like,
Mhm.
obviously doesn't can there's an entire country or landmass between those two, but very similar behavior in the sense of like the natives being treated very poorly in the name of God, and yet that's not what God wants us to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this is one of those things too, where we often don't realize how much the language that we use matters. Of like, I don't necessarily think that that even the majority of people that use that type of like militaristic language mean it in that sense. But I think that that's one of the things that's really cool about what Kaitlin brings is that from that other perspective, it's like, well, it's obviously what it's about. Like, and I think that that's something that is a good challenge to people like me, especially, um, as I come as like a straight white male. Like, I feel like that's something that, and kind of to get to the idea of not just decolonizing, but indigenizing. Um, but so it's not just about because this is a quote on the next page. Decolonization, it doesn't mean we go back to the beginning. It means we fix what is broken now for future generations. Like, and in general, like the people who were in charge when it was broken are probably not the people that should be in charge to fix it. And like, I feel like that's one of those challenges for people like me is that not that we shouldn't be supportive and that we shouldn't be there and be as involved as we can be, but that we need to be able to listen better to other voices. And we are not good at it.
As this quote I marked says, sometimes we forget that much of history is storytelling. And that is why it is powerful. On page 151, it goes on to talk about how a lot of history is white men, but that's for another topic of conversation.
I think intergenerational healing stood out to me from this realm. I think I grew up hearing a lot of prejudices towards Indigenous groups, and I think something that was particularly misunderstood and villainized was ancestors and like interacting with ancestors and things like that. Like, yeah, it was just very, didn't seem like it was a good thing to be doing. But the way that Curtice talks about it, it feels like an important thing to be doing. I guess just to the importance in knowing where you've come from, and also like in the good way of where you're grounded in, and also where um, faults and hurts lie as well that are still affecting you, and things that you can bring healing to. And then also thinking about the people that you will be an ancestor to, and how you are trying to heal things for them and leave a different kind of legacy for the people who will come after. And I think I haven't really heard intergenerational relationships talked of that way. And yeah, I just liked it.
I also feel like this realm is the most similar across all the ideas in like a good way. Like not saying that as a complaint, but I feel like I really liked from a storytelling or from like a writing perspective. I feel like all of these ideas are so like ingrained together, and I like they are not things like with how they're ingrained. They're not things that I would think of as being about that ancestral realm. And this goes, Shanine, to exactly what you were just talking about. And that's kind of what kicked me off as I was thinking about this. But like, I feel like that's such an awesome and very great way that she put together this section. And yeah, because it's so, as somebody that comes from a similar situation to what you were describing about like the villainization of the ancestor, of like it's so interesting to think of these things as that realm of like, whereas like in my head I'm like, oh, these seem almost more personal or communal even, but like I really liked this section for that. And this is definitely one that like I found myself struggling the most to remember where things were, like what section they were in, because I felt like it's like banger after banger. um, and so I really liked this section for that.
And lastly, bringing it all together in the integral realm, where we talk about integration, interspiritual relationship, prayer, dreaming, and lifelong resistance. Thoughts on this realm?
Do you want to kick us off for one, Janine? Oh, I guess we're taking a drink. I'll go. Um, so a quote that I grabbed was from the interspiritual relationships, and it said, "Because I'm a faith leader, people obviously ask me about my faith and theology a lot. I've lately come to say that I live on the periphery of Christianity, meaning I exist on the edge of the faith that raised me, not necessarily because I want to, but because I am asking so many questions that I have essentially journeyed to the edge myself. And what happens at that edge, I don't know. I have peace in not knowing, and as uncomfortable as it makes others who don't want me there. So I really liked this quote, especially as it ties back to Curtice's theme of the um, I'm always arriving. Um, and so I really liked that of like, we don't really always know where we are, but, or where we're going to be, but we can know where we are. And I kind of liked that idea of, again, her almost like redefining periphery of Christianity in this way as this like positive thing that has led her into these other relationships and to these places of growth rather than like whenever I was going through like church settings of like, well, if they're on the peripheral, they're in trouble. Like, but here this idea that through the questing, through asking, through seeking, like it's not that you're choosing not to be there, it's that you need to be curious and you need to seek this what is past this edge. And I really liked that imagery.
Me, I think there's a lot of good ones in this section for me too. But I think just integration really spoke to me. Um, I think talking about um, the center of your life, she talked about a lot, um, bringing everything together and what lies at the center. Um, and as I'm sitting there envisioning what the center of my life is, it is not anything like what I would like the center of my life to be. And I don't know, I think a lot of times we can blame like laziness or complacency for that kind of thing. I don't think that's what it is for me right now. I think it's more living still out of like survival and struggle. And that's just kind of where my life is right now. But I still, I think after reading this book and wanting to embody a lot of the ideas that were spoken about in it and wanting to live resistance in my own life. Um, I just like how a lot of this book was talking about working towards healing. And yeah, I think that's a lot of the work. Um, that I think was brought up in integration for me. Um, um, she talked about thinking about ways that you long to be seen and known, and ways that you have received or need healing. And I think those are just still things I'm thinking about. But I think I like that idea of integration, that it's not just like bringing together these ideas, but bringing together like the parts of yourself.
You guys said a lot of what I was thinking, um, and sort of feeling about this section. Um, she mentions the integration is such a sacred area. It is the space where we bring all of who we are, where there are no binaries that would cause us to feel like we can't fully show up. There is no this or that, no us or them. And that was a really good explanation to me of just integration as a whole, because I was admittedly kind of confused about what she meant or what she was getting at in this section for a while. But it made me think of, like, I have a lot of really good friends, um, but my best friend and I have known each other since we were 7. And the kind of person I feel I am with her is very different than the kind of person I feel that I am with my group of close friends from high school. And like both of those are like very much me, but it's a different kind of like who I feel I can show what parts of me, because one of them I've known for 20 years, the other I've known for like 12. So there's like that moment where she mentions like there is no this or that, no us or them. Like it made me think of that like relationship I have with different people, and that really put this whole section into light for me, and sort of what she was getting after. Um, but I also read this section very late at night, so I was tired and not fully understanding everything anyway. um, but yeah, that's really all I have to add, aside from you guys said a lot of what I was thinking in regards to integration.
Um, Curtice mentions that throughout our lives, we can move throughout the realms in different ways, be spending more time in certain ones or multiple ones. What realm are you spending the most time in right now or doing the most work in?
For me, it's probably the ancestral. That's the one, at least that I feel like going into this that had kind of been like on my heart. Um, and a lot of those again, this thing again, just to again praise that section. Like, not that I remotely thought of any of those ideas in this way, but I really liked how like that section really reframed a lot of what I've been thinking about lately and kind of helped me put words to it in a way that I hadn't in the past. And so that's the one that at least I currently feel myself struggling against the most, wanting to get to, wanting to arrive at a better place again to kind of just hit that theme. Um, and so that's one. And I think that that's the one for me that, at least currently, is the most outside my norm. Of like, I feel like I've struggled with the personal realm of presence since I was like 5. So like, here we are. We're still arriving. Like I'm a human being. I'm always arriving. Um, and but yeah, so I feel like at least for where I'm at currently, it's that ancestral realm.
I think for me, I'm primarily chilling in the personal realm. Um, in great part because I graduate next semester, so that's kind of like very exciting, but also the like, what am I gonna do next? I've accomplished the thing that I've always dreamed of accomplishing, and that is going to film school. Now what? So it's a very like inward time of like just reflecting and going, okay, what is the next step, and how do I feel about this, and what slash how do I want to use these skills I've accomplished slash gained to give back to the greater world and not just use them for the sake of using them. So
think I am also hanging out in the personal realm right now. Um, as I just mentioned, um, working on a lot of healing in my life, um, mental health wise, dealing with anxiety wise, and just trying to, I guess, establish a life that brings me joy despite dealing with anxiety and stress and situations that are not always ideal. Um, so, yeah, there's a lot of work going on in the personal realm for me right now. All right. One thing about the book that I particularly enjoyed but have not mentioned yet are the resistance commitments at the end of each chapter, kind of little challenges or ideas, little calls to action to apply the ideas talked about in each chapter. What did you all think of them, and did you try any?
I haven't tried them, but I would like to, slash, I am planning on doing so, as it's nice to have like little prompts for like personal reflection time that don't necessarily feel like I have to sit there and give a one sentence answer. I like having something that's like, oh yeah, I can like read this and think about it, and I'm allowed to go on a like mental tangent that like was spawned from this because it like I'm going to go there, but like trying by trying not to go there, I wouldn't get the thing. I wouldn't improve myself because I would be spending all my energy trying not to go on a tangent like I am now. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is like they're great little prompts for like thinking about these subjects and topics that sort of allow you to manage at your own pace and sort of like answer and contemplate to your own thought process. And I would like to sit and use them in contemplation.
I liked them in that, I don't know, I've read like a lot of books that, like you said, Emma, have just like a question at the end, but it like definitely has a right answer and like that sort of thing. Whereas these felt more like things to do to engage actively with the ideas, but also very like doable things in your life. Like it wasn't like stop racism in your city or like raise $1 million for a cause or anything like that. Like they were all very like simple in your own life, small ways that you can start to live resistance and just do something a little different in your life. Um,
Something that's actually manageable.
yes, I have not tried all of them, but I did try the one for presence, and I'm looking forward to doing it more. It was create a ritual for yourself to be present to yourself. And I just decided to have tea before bed no screens, no books, just like sit there and have some tea. And it was really nice to just like have a little cup of tea with myself.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, so, probably to the surprise of none of y'all, I severely procrastinated reading this book to the point that I read it basically over the past 2 days. So, or equivalent of reading it over 2 days. I guess I read like some of it like Friday, and then I read the other half of it yesterday. So, no, I enjoyed what I read of these, and I really want to go back and like spend more time on them. And I think this kind of leans into their strength, and this again kind of Shanine ties in with what you just said, that they're like I feel like they're very introspective. And they're not the like, oh well, I'll just stop racism. And because of that, like the first couple of them, I was like, oh, if I go down this like rabbit hole, like this is where I'll be for the like next hour. And I will not get this book done in time for book club. And so I definitely want to go back and spend more time because again, I really enjoyed what I like reading through them. I really enjoyed them, but I definitely need to give them um, an effort to like actually set aside time and go through them.
Was there anything else that stood out to you or any other quotes you would like to share?
Kitty. I have one other quote. I have a few others, but I'll stick it to one. Um, and this is from like the or towards the very beginning from the "What is Resistance" section. And she quotes Austin Hartke, who says, when a church is trans affirming, transgender Christians can show up as themselves unapologetically. By doing that, they show everyone else in the congregation that it is all right to bring their whole selves into the community, that no one has to fake it till you make it as a perfect Christian. And that hit me. Like, that was like, again, like right at the very beginning of like, um, of feeling that a lot of churches that I've been at have not had a welcoming attitude to a lot of the others. And that was something that like really stood out to me. And yeah, I think that was something that, again, as like this theme, at least in the theme for me of this, of what does our view of the other cause us to do. I think that quote stood out to me, and that idea of like, well, when we tell one group of people they're not welcome, what we're really doing is telling every group you might not be. So now every group is scared to be themselves because they might no longer be welcome. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I loved that quote. And again, it was one that it's on like page 27. And so it's like super early in the book. And that was one that I really connected with and kind of carried me through as a theme throughout the book.
Anything else for you, Emma? Me either. Are there any practices or values you will take with you after reading this book?
I feel like for me, the biggest thing is being much more mindful in my life of like mindful and intentional in my interactions with myself and others and just the world around me and how I can use those interactions to resist and improve myself and the world we are working towards.
I'll yield my time for this question for the final thought.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think I would like to continue my practice of a cup of tea before bed. Um, if not every night, like once or twice a week at least. Um, and I think a lot of like what Emma was saying, a lot more mindfulness and intentionalness about um, just connection. And I think presence, I think presence to myself and community, ancestors, all of that. Yeah, being more about being a human being. Final thoughts.
So for me, one of the quotes has been like a part of my life for a while. Is from Mother Teresa. It's the idea of small acts with great love, and that was something that I really connected with. The ideas in this book of like resistance isn't always uh, this seemingly unsurmountable thing of toppling all the mistakes of the past. Like resistance can be those small acts with great love. Um, and yeah, that was something that I really loved about how Kaitlin like paints resistance through this in a way that again is different from how I feel like it gets talked about a lot, or at least how I see it talked about a lot.
My final thought, I would recommend this. I think I'm going to send my copy to my mom. I think she'll like it.
I recommend it as well.
Yes.
Yes, I also recommend it. I think it lives up to its subtitle of an Indigenous Vision for Seeking Wholeness Every Day. All right. Our next book club will be Silence by Shusaku Endo and translated by William Johnston on April 27th. Um, yeah, I'm excited for this one. Full disclosure, it has been sitting in my TBR for like, I
A
can't
very long
remember
time.
if I got it this past Christmas or the Christmas before that. So either a few months or a year.
So a
So
very
yeah,
long time.
I'm excited to be getting to it.
Yep. This is once again Shanine uses book club to clear her backlog.
I
And we're
didn't
a-okay with
force
that.
it. I gave a lot of options.
Yes, you always provide great choices, and so
All right. Thank you for joining us for Book Club discussing Living Resistance by Kaitlin B. Curtice. We are First Geek 411. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Join our Discord server or shoot us an email at onestgeek411 at gmail.com. Check out our Redbubble store and watch live on our Twitch and find all our videos over on YouTube. You can find me at the Hoot and Howl on Twitter and Hoot and Howl Tales, TALES, on Instagram.
And I am not prepared with an I. I almost forgot my own thing.
And I'm Humar Whittle.
Some tea.
Read a book.